Hi everyone, welcome back to my Discworld read-through. Today we're up to the 5th book in the Discworld series, Sourcery. I'm very excited to be getting back into the series again. Let me just remind you of the rules for this video series, just so you're all on the same page. You can watch these videos in any order because Discworld is very episodic. There's no spoilers for major plot points, but my videos are like a movie trailer where I'll tell you a couple of the entry-level things at the start of the book, so hopefully I'm enticing you to read it. Now, let's continue. So Sourcery is the 5th Discworld book, but it's the 3rd in the Rincewind series. Rincewind's probably our main character. The Rincewind novels are always very comedy heavy and they're very satire heavy. And by satire, I mean they make fun of common story tropes. You know, the things we see in the books all the time. Like this one has a chosen one, but of course the chosen one is a raging lunatic, very evil guy. That's kind of the satire there. The first time I read Sourcery, I remember laughing a lot, but not being that impressed by the story, and thinking that the plot was maybe a little bit weaker. And now I'm reading it about 5 or 6 years later, my second time through it, I see the point of the plot. I do still think it's a little bit weaker, but it's also not that bad of a novel. This is one of the funniest of the Discworld novels. It's perhaps one of the most comedy heavy, and some of my favorite Discworld comedy segments are in this one. Let's talk about what the story is all about. Sourcery is about a chosen one. You see, in wizard lore on the Discworld, a 8th son of an 8th son is a wizard. But if a wizard has an 8th son, he's a sorcerer, a wizard squared, if you will. A wizard can wield magic, but a sorcerer is literally a source of magic, literally wielding creation itself. In this story, a child sorcerer arrives at the unseen university and very quickly seizes control of all the wizards and sets them on a warpath to take control of the entire Discworld. And to resist this incredible force of ungodly magic is the helpless Rincewind, the most incompetent wizard, Nigel the Destroyer, who has literally just read one book on heroism, and Konina, not Conan, Konina, the hairdresser. So something special about this book, it's the 3rd Rincewind book, but it's also the first to not include Twoflower. Up to this point, the Rincewind books have had Rincewind and Twoflower as a comedy duo. This time, Twoflower's gone back to his own home, and Rincewind's on his own, taking the lead role as the protagonist here. It's a much more different dynamic. Again, it's very comedy heavy. I literally think this is one of the funniest of the Discworld books. And again, just a very overly whimsy plot. There's a lot of ambitious storytelling in this with big magic, but it doesn't quite blend as well with the humor like later Discworld books do, where they get that balance of tone. Such extreme tones find that perfect balance in the middle. This book doesn't quite get that. There's too much contrast, I feel. And the satire itself is a lot of fun. So the Chosen One is obviously the bad guy in this situation. Those trying to stop the Chosen One are the good guys. And also the heroes... They're incredibly anticlimactic characters. They had just a massive letdown, and that's what's so funny about it. There's also a great bit of satire around evil layers, and there's very much like a James Bond feel to one evil layer, where he's going into the island of Dr. No, or Ernst Blofeld, and yeah, that's one of my favorite segments, very much making fun of the evil lair type. Our 3 main characters in this book are once again Rincewind, and Rincewind is still just as cowardly and just as incompetent as ever. In fact, there's this wonderful quote about Rincewind that says, "There are 8 levels of wizardry on the disc. After 16 years, Rincewind has failed to achieve even level 1. In fact, it is considered opinion of some of his tutors that he is incapable even of achieving level 0, which most normal people are born at. To put it another way, it has been suggested when Rincewind dies, the average occult ability of the human race will actually go up by a fraction." And yet in many ways, this is the book where I feel as though Rincewind moves beyond being a bit of a trope character. You see, Rincewind is very much a satire character. He's the hero who's a coward, subverts those expectations. But this is the one where he becomes a little bit more of a trope. He becomes a lot more cynical. He's not just necessarily a coward, he's also a cynic because, life hasn't worked out for him the way that he expected it to. A lot of Rincewind's more cowardly statements are actually kind of wise. Our next main character is Nigel the Destroyer, and again, he's a wannabe hero. He's like a boy on a farm who wants to rise up and do great deeds. This book makes a lot of fun of him and just how utterly ignorant and naive people like that can be, and how it doesn't really make much sense to just pick up a sword and go fight, a sorcerer with godlike powers. Like, what are you really gonna do? And this book, actually points out the reality of that type of belief. And Konina, the hairdresser, she's a great character because there's a lot of expectation on her because she has a famous father who's a great warrior, and she thinks, oh, because it's in my blood, I'm just going to be a great warrior as well. And again, in a similar way, she finds out that things are a little bit more complicated than that, and just having natural, bloodlines or a powerful father does not mean that the world is going to work out for you the way you expect.
Ridiculous. You know what? Call Daddy.
Also noteworthy is the librarian. So we briefly see the librarian in the second book, The Light Fantastic, and he is literally a human librarian who works in the Unseen University, but then a magical spell turns him into an orangutan. And at the end of that book, he's like, no, I'm happy being an orangutan. Well, in this book, the librarian is back, and it's the first time where he's actually a character who gets involved with the plot. The librarian ends up being a reoccurring character. Sometimes he shows up in the Rincewind books, but sometimes he shows up in the City Watch books as well. And all he ever says is, ook. That's just his great joke. Also, he hates when people call him a monkey. He's an ape. It's very different. The librarian is very much the Discworld's Groot character, who just says one thing over and over again, and yet is completely lovable for it. Now, the plot of this book is focused around the sorcerer taking over the wizards and them spreading out and trying to take over the world. And then there's our hopeless band of D&D warriors who have no idea what they're doing, completely incompetent, and just sort of fumbling through trying to stay ahead of this incredible opponent. Yet, despite the silliness of this concept, this book in many ways has some of the most large-scale and epic magic we ever see in the wider Discworld. In fact, the gods themselves get drawn into this war, and mighty monsters from the ancient times get involved as well. It really goes quite epic when it really wants to. As I said, I do think this is sadly one of the examples of a very serious and ambitious plot with a lot of silliness, and it doesn't quite gel as well. I think by the time of Guards, we start getting that perfect blend a little bit better. Yet despite this silly book, there are still some pretty deep themes in this story. The main theme in this one is you are who you choose to be. It's one of my favorite themes. They included in the Iron Giant.
You are who you choose to be.
There's a great quote in this book that says, it's vital to remember who you really are. It's very important. It isn't a good idea to rely on other people or things to do it for you, you see. They always get it wrong. This book challenges the idea that just because you're born with a certain ability, that doesn't mean you have to do it that way. And just because you've lived your life up to this point as a coward, it doesn't mean you need to be a coward tomorrow. That everything about us, our history, our biology, and our identity can all change the moment we're bold enough to make that decision. Quite simply put, our past does not determine our future. And despite this being a comedy-heavy book, it really hammers home this theme in a very effective way. Now, like I said, this is a very humorous book as well, and this one absolutely nailed so many of the jokes. One of my favorite segments in all of Discworld is when Rincewind is captured in the evil lair, and they're trying to come up with a punishment for him, but every single punishment idea fails just because of bureaucratic incompetence. Like, one of my favorite lines is when the evil advisor says, "Throw him in the pit of eternal fire." And the henchman says, sir, we need a bit of forewarning before we can use the pit of eternal fire. I always like this joke. Other thieves merely stole everything that was not nailed down, but this thief stole the nails as well. Yet some of you might wonder, if I'm reviewing a Rincewind book, why am I wearing a death shirt? It's a little bit off theme, right? Well, no. See, one of the most famous quotes about death comes from this book. It's not from one of his death books. The quote is, Ipsilor said bitterly, "What is there in this world that truly makes living worthwhile?" Death thought about it. "Cats," he said eventually. "Cats are nice." And that's the quote that's on this shirt. Cats are nice. And again, this is a perfect example of the brilliance of Discworld, because we think it's just like a whimsy answer, or like almost a nothing dismissive answer. But it's kind of perfect. Death is saying, the purpose, the thing that makes life living, the meaning of life, is the small joys. It's not necessarily the big things or our great accomplishments or the wealth we accumulate. It's the little things that bring little bits of happiness. That's kind of the point. Cats. Cats are nice. Still, Sourcery is the last of the Rincewind books for a little while. I think the next book is Interesting Times. Let me check that. 15, 16, 17. Yeah. The next Rincewind book is Interesting Times, which is the 17th Discworld book, and then there's The Last Continent, which is the 23rd. So even though Rincewind dominates the first 5 books of this series, he doesn't show up quite as much in the long term. And it sounds mean, but I think that's probably for the best. A lot of the satire story types don't necessarily age as well. Like, I think a lot of the stories that Terry Pratchett was critiquing when he wrote this in the 80s were stories that were very common in the 80s. And fantasy is a genre that evolves a lot and has changed a lot. So a lot of the things he's making fun of ended up not being as used in this day and age. Sorry, I tell a lie. Once again, I have forgotten about Eric, the 9th book in the Discworld series. It's only a novella, it's 100 pages long, I'm always forgetting it. Technically, that is another Rincewind book. Still, while this book may not necessarily have the most highest reviews or be the most talked about, I still think it's a very funny book, and I had so much fun rereading it. I encourage you not to discount it just because it's not quite as loved as other books in this series. It's still got a lot to offer and plenty of the classic Discworld wit. All right, moving on. The next book in the series we're talking about is Witches Abroad. No, not Witches Abroad. It is, no. Yes. No. Weird Sisters. Weird Sisters. The 6th book is Weird Sisters. Granny Weatherwax returns when we talk about the next one. I hope you'll join me for that. Guys, if you enjoy the work I'm doing on my channel, I encourage you to check out my own books, The Immortal Investigations, my own shop, or my Patreon. Any of those things will keep me going around here. I hope you enjoy a good book today, and I hope it's a Discworld book. Bye.